Hi, welcome to Roy's Book Reviews. Today I would like to share my thoughts with you about the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. I discovered the existence of this novel, like many others did, as a result of the recent movie adaptation called American Fiction. I was intrigued by the premise laid out in the movie trailer and decided that I would read the book before I saw the movie, which I did. I finished reading Erasure yesterday, and I watched the movie American Fiction earlier today. I will focus mostly on the book, but also share my opinions on what the movie did well in capturing the spirit of the book and the changes that were made, whether they were for the better or for the worse. As for the book, I will say that Erasure is about an author named Thelonious Ellison, who is nicknamed Monk, because what other nickname would you give to someone named Thelonious? Monk is African American, and the novels he writes are highbrow, experimental fare, not everybody's cup of tea. Since his writing is over the head and beyond the interest and patience level of the average fiction reader, the degree of commercial success achieved by Monk is moderate at best. His books may have a niche audience of intellectuals, but since that doesn't describe the average American, these novels do not get anywhere close to the top of bestseller lists. Monk is fine with this because he is mostly fine with who he is and the type of artist that he wants to be. With his latest book having gotten 17 rejections without finding a home yet, Monk is primed to rethink his priorities. They get nudged further when a first-time novel that he considers to be pure drivel and blaxploitation and offensive to those who value quality literature ends up becoming the darling of the publishing industry. As a Black author and avid reader, it was particularly easy for me to identify with Thelonious Monk. Back in 2009, at my blog, A Line a Day, I wrote a post called Black Literature, Dead or Alive. It begins as follows. So-called black literature is not quite dead, but seriously injured, in my humble opinion, as someone who reads and writes plenty of it. This most likely is a temporary, even if rather long-lasting condition. The problem isn't that there are not plenty of African American authors writing quality novels. The problem is that these books aren't the ones being published, or when they are published, not the ones being heavily marketed and promoted. Major publishers, who despite the emergence of self-publishing, still by far have the biggest say, have decided that only a small segment of fiction by Black authors is sellable. This segment is largely made up of so-called urban, street, hip-hop fiction. The way I felt when writing that post mirrors how Thelonious Monk feels about We Lives in the Ghetto, authored by a Black woman who once visited some relatives in Harlem for a couple of days and found inspiration to pen a terrible, but also terribly successful book. Out of annoyance over the state of affairs, Monk dashes off his own ghetto story and sends this work of parody to his agent. Under the pseudonym Stag R. Lee, Monk's satire is a hit that lands him a 6-figure publishing deal and later a 7-figure movie deal. Nothing can stop its momentum, not even him insisting on changing the title from My Pathology to Fuck. At another time in his life, perhaps Monk would have called a halt to things before they got out of hand, stuck with his single existence as a serious author of serious art. With his mother needing to be institutionalized due to the onset of Alzheimer's, his sister recently murdered, his brother unhelpful financially or emotionally, Monk decides to keep the ruse going to cash in on the financial rewards of his accidental hit book so that he can pay for all of these new expenses that he has to take on mostly by himself. And it's not as if he's cheating. He did write the novel, which is contained in its entirety within Erasure. It's not his fault that power brokers and the storytelling industry are enthralled rather than aghast. Monk is not the first author to use an invented name rather than claiming ownership of a work under his own, thus claiming a dual identity. It's just that he wrote My Pathology as a joke, as an FU to those who celebrate artistic mediocrity and embrace over-the-top stereotypes of black people who they peer voyeuristically at, rather than respect as equals on and off page. The thing about making a joke, though, is that sometimes the audience doesn't get it. Sometimes they take you seriously. Sometimes events take on a life of their own, rather than keeping to the shape that you fashioned for them. Maintain integrity or complete the act of selling out, otherwise known as take the money and run. This is Monk's dilemma. Deciding on which way to go is as easy or as difficult as the person makes it for himself. Percival Everett is a wonderful writer, and along with the portion of the plot involving book publishing, various subplots are touched upon that each make for absorbing reading. Particularly, Monk's dealing with losing his mother, even though she's still alive, because she has Alzheimer and is forgetting who she is and who her loved ones are. And him also reflecting on the impact of his father, who died a little earlier. These subplots serve to give the reader a full picture of the protagonist's life and values, rather than the novel's narrative focusing exclusively on the absurd situation that Monk has gotten himself into. It veers repeatedly from hilarious to heartbreaking and back again. I'm definitely looking forward to reading more of Percival Everett's work in the future. And Erasure is definitely a great start to his work. As I said earlier, I watched the movie American Fiction today, and I think it did a pretty good job of maintaining the tone of the book. Jeffrey Wright does a great job portraying Thelonious Monk, and I think he really captured his essence. And for the most part, the story is unchanged, except for the end. The book just sort of stops, whereas in the movie, they get a little playful. I don't want to go into spoiler territory, so I won't tell you how either one ends, except to say that they are different, and yet I do feel that the movie did capture the spirit even of the ending of the book, despite it closing in a very different way. There are characters in the book who are barely touched upon, really just have a few pages of mention, where in the movie they are given a little bit more prominence in the story. One of those characters being Thelonious's brother, and another one of those characters being a woman that Thelonious briefly dates, or rather briefly dates in the book. In the movie, they stay together a good bit longer. The character of the mother is, I would say, more central to the novel because Thelonious spends a lot of time with her, and in the book, she is more often than not really aware of what's going on. In the movie, for the most part, she is still the woman that she was before Alzheimer's took over. And lastly, the character who wrote the book that drives Thelonious Monk crazy in the first place and causes him to write his own ghetto story as just a way of, expressing his annoyance about the success of the other book. That character is just really mentioned in the book, but they don't really appear in the storyline in any way. In the movie, one of the things that happens in both the book and the movie is that Thelonious ends up being chosen to be one of the 5 judges of a prestigious literary prize. It's supposed to be the equivalent of like the Booker Prize or something like that. And in the book, it's him and these 4 other writers that are only in the story because they are, the fellow judges. In the movie, one of the 5 judges is the author of the book that sets Thelonious off in the first place. So she becomes a character. The character is played by Issa Rae, who's rather important to the story. And there's a scene in the movie that's not in the book where they are discussing their 2 books, and Thelonious, knows, that he wrote the book, My Pathology, fuck, whatever you want to call it. But the Issa Rae character does not know that he wrote it. And they both agree that it is not a very good book. But then Thelonious is like, okay, how come you feel that my book, which I know is terrible, we both agree that that's not very good, but you wrote your own book that is pretty similar in tone and in style, and yet you are not ashamed of it and you take pride of it. And her response is basically that, well, I just write for the market. Like Thelonious, she is someone who is much more of a sophisticated writer and person than the book that she puts out there. She went to a fancy school, and she is not in any way from the streets, very particularly urban or anything like that. But she does not seem to feel that she sold out in writing her book, because she says she interviewed people and felt that she was just telling the story of others rather than the story of her own upbringing. I kind of sided with Thelonious in that argument that's in the movie, because I feel that she is just as much a sellout as he is, but she's not tortured by it, and he is. So that's about all I have to say about the book as well as the movie. I highly recommend, endorse both of them. I think you should do what I did and read the book first and then see the movie. But I read this book faster than I read the typical book, because I was very much sucked into it, and a lot of it has to do with just the excellence of Percival Everett's writing. It goes down quite easily. I'm looking forward to more of his stuff. I know he has a book out that is a reimagining of Huckleberry Finn, and it's from the point of view of the Jim character. I think the name of it is James. So I will be reading that book in a relatively near future, because I have a feeling that Percival Everett is going to become one of my favorite authors. Until next time, this is Roy, wishing you all happy reading.